on webcast, and then you click on live stream, and then you can watch it. Anyway, to get the full effect, and particularly since Diane and I both shop at the same store in Santa Fe, I'm wearing one and she's got a new one. It's fabulous. We thought we'd get her sleeping in so you can all admire what she's got on, because costume is part of this whole deal, right? Yeah, so anyway, she looks great. And I am wearing my new necklace, which I just unpacked in the back room. My husband and I were driving around Europe, and as we were whizzing by Strasbourg, he said, we need gas, and he said, oh, look, there's Baccarat. And I said, no. And it was Baccarat on the map. I said, it can't really be Baccarat, but you know what? It actually was Baccarat. And amazingly for the French, on Sunday, it was open. The museum and the gift shop. Now, I mean, if you've ever traveled in France, the French are jealous to protect their 35-hour work week. And they open at 10, and they close at 12:30, and they reopen after 2 until 6. And it can drive you mad if you're trying to like visit a museum or something, because you have this really narrow window. So sure enough, we arrive in Baccarat 11:45, and the museum is closing. So we rush up, and I have this really sort of little natural thing, you know, I could do where I just look pitiful and tears come to my eyes and I say, and they always say, well, you can come back at 2, and we say, well, not really, we're just driving through. And then almost always, because they're nice, they say, well, why don't you just come in for free, but you won't be able to see anything. Now, let me tell you what, I am a really experienced museum goer, and my husband is too. We can see a lot in 12 minutes. A lot. So we whizzed around the museum, but then there was a glorious gift shop that didn't appear to want to close when we came in the door. I'm sure they thought they probably sent it money. And sure enough, my husband thought that this necklace was fabulous. So what it actually is baccarat. It's crystal. It's not silver. So, oh, here, I'll get up. And the reason I'm wearing it, and the only reason I'm wearing it with this outfit, which it doesn't go with, is that we put it on, but neither one of us can figure out how to open the clasp. Get it off. So I consulted Diana, and she said, if you just take off the gold earrings, you can wear it through this, because it really looks tacky. So I'm stuck in the necklace, and I thought, well, I might as well come out and show you all how it is. But in any case, I never thought about them actually making jewelry. You know, I mean, lamps, yes, and fabulous stuff, but who knew that they had a whole line in jewelry? And my husband, who is really sweet, thought that it would be nice to get one. So that was a serendipitous moment as we toured our way through France. Anyway, what we need now is Diana. Aha. Hey, Leah, you want to tell her it's time? And thank you all for being patient while I was killing a few minutes there. Are you allowed to take pictures? It would be best if you wait till the book signing part, not this part, because if it's in our eyes, it's hard to see. Here she comes, wearing her fabulous new outfit. Please give Diana Gabaldon a round of applause. I was telling you that we shop in the same store in Santa Fe, but you've clearly been there recently. It's gorgeous. You are welcome. So, for the benefit of our webcast audience, it's Tuesday, the 23rd of October. I'm Barbara Peters. This is the Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we are here to celebrate the publication of a new book by Diana Gabaldon called A Trail of Fire. Yay! Yay. This book has an interesting history, which Diana could probably tell you. This book has been imported from England, where it's published by Diana's British publisher, Orion.
Yeah, what this book actually is a collection of 4 novellas. And I wrote these novellas over the space of the last 3 years or so for one or another anthologies. I happen to know George R.R. Martin. We both live in Santa Fe periodically and have breakfast together when we do. But he asked me originally would I write a novella for an anthology that he was doing. And I said, yeah, sure, sounds interesting. So I did. And he and Gardner Dozois do these anthologies usually once a year. And so I think I've written 3 stories for George. Well, meanwhile, another anthologist named John Joseph Adams asked me to write a story for him for an anthology called The Mad Scientist's Guide to World Domination, which I thought was such a neat title that I did. And so that's where these 4 novellas came from. They are still all available in the original anthologies in which they were published, except for the one written for The Mad Scientist's Guide to World Domination, which has not yet been published. So that one, which is a 40,000 word novella, that's a fairly large chunk, is the 4th one in this book. The other 3 came from an anthology called Warriors, an anthology called Songs of Love and Death, and one called Down These Strange Streets. That was the Plague of Zombies. Okay, anyway, I thought that since I had these lying around, so to speak, I began to get the reprint rights back. An anthology doesn't usually stay in print for more than a couple of years, and therefore your contract will give you back the reprint rights within a year or 2 years of the original publication. So these stories were starting to come back to me, and so I said to my U.S. agent, I said, why don't we try e-publishing these, because we were interested in experimenting with that. And so we did. We e-published Custom of the Army, which is available for download if you live in the U.S. or Canada. Now, meanwhile, I had also mentioned to my foreign rights agent that we had these stories that were beginning to come back to me. He promptly went off and sold all 4 of them to Orion in the UK. The catch there being that all of the reprint rights hadn't come back yet. So there was a certain amount of jockeying around. But we were able to free up the foreign reprint rights, and therefore Orion in the UK could publish them all together as a book. But we can't publish them in the US until I get all those reprint rights back. That's why this is only available as an import book. So if you want it now, you either have to buy the 3 anthologies and wait for the 4th one, which would be a lot more expensive than this book, even with shipping. Or you can buy it from the UK, or you can wait and download the stories one at a time as they become available. So the first one, The Custom of the Army, which is a Lord John story, is available right now as an ebook through Amazon.com and etc. The next one, A Leaf on the Wind of All Hallows, will be available December the 3rd. And then the next one, Plague of Zombies, comes out in April, and so forth. But the new one, Space Between, won't come out till January. And therefore we can't publish this book in the US and Canada until a year from next January.
Wow, that's probably more than you really wanted to know, but it explains the $43 price tag, because not only is it priced in pounds, but these books don't actually swim here. And air freight being what it is. The other good news is that we have this book before it's actually been published, because the UK publication date is in November. So you guys are way ahead of the curve if you bought one tonight, because we scheduled this event and then they rescheduled the pub date, and then I met with Diana's publishers in Frankfurt and I said, we can't really redo this. So they printed, I want you to know, they printed this book a week ago today. And got
Especially
it
for you.
Yes. So, it's really very special. And I wrote to congratulate them on, their amazing technique, because, that was a tremendous job. But I think we should talk to you a little bit about, or Diana should talk to you a little bit about the whole sort of Outlander chronology, because you have to remember that Diana has been here at the Poison Pen since before she was a published author. She used to come in and what? A long time ago. It was a long time ago. You used to come in your blue jeans and your sort of, what was it, your non-author disguise?
My working clothes, jeans and sweatshirt.
Right.
That's what I actually write in.
She would skulk around the shelves and order weird Scottish books, which we reported. And the really good news about that, here's another little tidbit for Orion, is that when Ian Rankin made his first trip to the United States to BoucherCon as a successful author, and I think it was 1991, I was the only person at the convention that knew who he was, and he was amazed. And I said, well, let me tell you about Diana. She's been reading your books, so it was very helpful. Anyway, you've got what you call 3 kinds of stories. You have a helpful appendix here in the back.
Yeah, it's called the Chronology of the Outlander series. Essentially, we have the big books of the main series. I call them big, enormous books, or BEBs for short. And there are 7 of those at the moment. These are the main Jamie and Claire books. And to forestall the most frequently asked question, yes, there is an eighth one. And yes, you will get it actually fairly soon here. It's coming along really well. And I should, with any luck, be finished writing it around April or May of next year. And the publisher usually likes to bring my books out in September or October for the Christmas run-up. So you'll get it, with 98% certainty around next fall. So,
And it's called?
Oh, and it is called Written in My Own Heart's Blood, or Moby for short.
And you can actually order it now.
For the poison
I think I'm kidding. We have orders already in for this book in the speculative hope, I guess, that you're going to finish it.
That I will actually finish it. Well, if I'm not run over by a bus on my way home or anything like that. I'm just your fingers crossed.
Don't even do it. All right, so you have the bets. I was actually calling it Beeps, but that sounded a lot like the BBC.
There's that.
Beps is better.
Yes, it is. And then we have the smaller novels. The acronym for those is SLINs, but I can't at the moment remember what that stands for.
It stands for the shorter, less indescribable novels,
Yeah.
or SLINS, or SLINs.
Right. Okay. Less indescribable because I have never been able to describe the main Outlander books to anyone in 25 words or less, and neither has anyone else. Now, the shorter books can more or less be described. They tend to be more or less mystery stories, or focused around some sort of mysterious happenings. Most of these deal with Lord John Grey, who is a major minor character from the main books. Most of you will have met him before. He was an accident, or rather his books are an accident. Or both. Yeah, well, you could describe pretty much anything in these books as an accident. I really don't plan them out ahead of time because this would not be fun. I want to see what's going to happen. And I don't write them in a straight line either, so, anybody's guess how they're going to come out. But Lord John is an interesting character. He's aristocrat, a spy, a soldier, a diplomat, all-around good egg, very nice man, etc. But he's also gay in a century when that was a capital offense. You just really want people to out you in that case. And so consequently, he has a lot of inbuilt conflicts that give him interesting stories. But what happened is that, these many years ago, Maxim Jakubowski asked me would I write a short story for an anthology he was compiling of historical crime. And I said, well, it would be an interesting technical challenge to see if I could write something less than 300,000 words. So I said, all right, I'll give it a try. And I thought about that. Owing to the unusual way in which I write stories, I thought if I wrote something that had significant weight, which you'd need to make a good story, then whatever happened in that story would kind of distort the next book to follow, because I'd have to take that into account if I wrote this short story about Jamie and Claire. And so I thought, well, there's Lord John. He's an interesting character, but he's not in the books all the way through. He's there, and then he's off stage. He's there, and then he's off stage. Obviously, he's leading an interesting life when he's off stage. Why don't I write about one of those happenstances that I won't interfere with anything? And so I did. I wrote Lord John and the Hellfire Club, which, was published. It did very well. And people liked it, but then that anthology went out of print pretty quickly. And people kept asking, well, where can we get this story? And I said, well, you can't, basically. This was long before the days of web publishing or anything like that. There was just nothing you could do with a 14,000-word short story. And so I said, well, I enjoyed writing that story. What if I were to write another one? And maybe a couple more as time and inclination allowed. And, whenever I found myself with a handful, we could publish them as a small book, and then everybody could have them, which is essentially what you're holding in your hands right now. And so I said, all right, and began writing another short story just to break my luck when I came back from a book tour. The inertia builds up when you don't write for a long time, and it's you're sitting there thinking, I used to know how to write, but right now I don't, and you have to start somehow. Sometimes it's easier to start with something a little less threatening than your main book. So I began writing the second Lord John story, and then began picking up the threads of my novel with the other hand. Well, I continued doing this for 6 months or so, and then went back for another book tour in the UK. Stopped in New York to talk to my 2 agents over lunch, and said, oh, and by the way, I just finished the second Lord John short story. And they said, oh, that's great, how long is this one? And I said, I knew you'd ask, so I checked. I said, it's about 80,000 words. I need maybe 5 more to finish it. They looked at each other, they looked at me, and they said, that's the size normal books are. I said, I thought it was a short story. And they said, well, it's not. So they took it off and they sold it to everybody in sight, and, bing, we had a whole new series, so to speak. And so that was Lord John and the Private Matter. So when you read that book, bear in mind that I thought it was a short story when I wrote it. No, but they gave me a 3-book contract to write Lord John stories in addition to the Jamie and Claire books. And so Brotherhood of the Blade actually was a deliberate novel, and so was Scottish Prisoner. Those are the other 2 books in that. Meanwhile, I had collected 3 novellas, the original Hellfire Club, Lord John and the Succubus, and Lord John and the Haunted Soldier, which I wrote specifically for that collection. Those 3 are included in Lord John and the Hand of Devils. Let's see. So
And those you call bulges.
Those are bulges, the little novellas. They
Yeah.
fit kind of into the body of the main work, you know, like something that a snake has swallowed. Makes a large bulge.
Like a python. But you can see what's really going on here is that you wrote, what, 3 bibs before they got published, before anything else? Is that right?
Yeah.
So what's happening is that Diana has started expanding the whole Outlander and writing almost like parallel books, you know, stuff that's going on, while the big book's action is as it is. And the good news is there's so many characters and so many little sort of like throwaway bits in the big books that you have a universe of other things that you can write about. For example, in your first book here, story, A Leaf on the Wind of All Hallows.
Yeah.
We find out what happened to, is that the right one? Yeah. Jerry and Dolly Mackenzie.
Yeah, Roger Mackenzie's parents, who you will have seen mentioned very briefly in the main books. Well, now we find out what happened to them. In Echo in the Bone, you remember Roger is recalling what Claire said to him about his father. She said, "I don't know what they told you about your father, but it wasn't true." And this is actually the result of a mistake on my part. People say, well, do you write things that turn out to be mistaken, and do readers call you on it? And I say, well, yeah, they do, but I can usually wiggle out of it. And this was one of those occasions in that I reported Roger as saying that his father was a Spitfire pilot and was shot down over the channel. Okay, some World War trivia freak wrote to me and said, actually Spitfires never flew across the channel, so you're wrong. And I wrote back and said, no, I'm not, just wait and see. So if you read this story, you'll find out how not.
It was a fairly nice save, and I also thought, without giving away, although it's not a mystery, so, you know, we're not doing a spoiler here, but it's got a sort of nice sentimental touch in it there that I thought was really sporting of you. And also, I enjoyed the fact that you give your husband Douglas credit not only for some of the technology, but the really nifty idea that brought the plane down.
Yeah. Well, my husband flies small planes. He's got a third-class airman certificate, I think they call it. But he's done everything from gliders to aerobatics in a 50-year-old biplane, which was just hair-raising. To I didn't go with him in it. Just hearing about it was hair-raising. But I did fly with him in some of the small 2-seater Cubs and 4-seater Cessnas and things like that. Anyway, he gave me assistance on what it feels like to fly a plane and some of the aerobatic maneuvers that you could or would be doing in a Spitfire, you know, to avoid enemy fire and all that. And so I am in the habit of talking over bits and pieces of plot with him while we drive places. And so I said, well, you know, I really need his plane to come down under sort of a controlled crash situation. I don't want him to, you know, spiral headfirst into the ground. I want him to kind of, you know, scoot in on the belly of the plane, you know. What would make him do that? And so I thought about it, and he said, you know, Spitfire is really very simple mechanically. There's not that much. He said, oh, but the oil line could come apart. You know, if that happened, you know, suddenly you have no motor, and you better be looking for a flat place to land. You don't have much time. I said, perfect. So that's where we got it.
It's really very handy, isn't it, to have a technical consultant, because, I mean, you know, your mastery of military hardware is really impressive. So I kind of figured you'd help, seeing how it all went. But I really, I enjoyed that story. The rest of them, I mean, now that's a World War II story. The other 3 novellas in this are earlier in time.
Yeah, they're set in
18th
different
century.
parts of the 18th century. Custom of the Army is set in 1759, and Plague of Zombies in 1761. This is because they're bracketing the novel Scottish Prisoner. The novellas tend to alternate with the novels in Lord John's separate chronology here. And essentially what I do is I look for, well, I take my book called the Timetables of History, which has several parallel bars that list things like developments in literature and the arts, government, politics, religion, etc. And they list them by year. So I just look up what year that was and see what interesting event might be happening that Lord John could be involved in. So I did that for 1759. I was writing Scottish Prisoner at the time, and I said, well, maybe I should fill in something between the end of Brotherhood of the Blade, which ended in 1758, and Scottish Prisoner, which has to be in 1760 for other reasons. So I looked and I said, oh, Battle of Quebec, perfect. I've actually been in Quebec.
That's right. In fact, if you've been in Quebec and stayed at the Chateau Frontenac, which is that really cool hotel, you know, that you can see, right below it are what are called the Plains of Abraham. And from the river, that's where the British actually scaled up the cliffs and caught the French by surprise and won the battle, which is considered sort of sneaky or poor sportsmanship in war, but nonetheless effective, right?
Yes, if you actually go there and look up this cliff of, you know, shattered shale and all that, you wouldn't think anyone could climb it in daylight with full mountain climbing regalia, let alone at night, you know, with the enemy above. And it was 24 Highlanders who climbed that cliff and made the trail, up which they not only brought the whole rest of the army, but all of their armament as well. They dragged cannon up that cliff.
Of course it was Highlanders. I mean, come on, this was the Outlander series. It wasn't going to be like Welshmen or something doing this.
No, it really was Outlander. I mean, it really was Highlanders who did it. Consequently, there's a placard, or, you know, a plaque at the bottom of the cliff, you know, retailing the event, you know, and, you know, just noting the, you know, the spectacularness of the feat. Up above, if you go and walk out on the actual battlefield on the Plains of Abraham, there's another plaque in French noting how unsportsmanlike this was.
That's really true. But this is the reason that Canada today is British and not French, is that General Wolfe and, you know, his troops managed to win this particular fight. So it was a really cool thing to write about. And you do have a great time taking real history and being true to those facts and your chronology and all, and then you interpolate fictional characters.
Yeah, no, that makes it fun. You know, I had a friend who, this was some years ago, wrote historical romances, and she said the history was enough to keep her interested in the story. She thought the rest of it was, you know, mere rote interpolation of fictional characters, which wasn't so much fun. And she said that she had the most terrible time writing what she described as F-word scenes, and didn't like that at all. But she had a next-door neighbor who really liked that sort of scene and offered to write them for her. So that's what they did. The next door neighbor wrote the sex scenes, and my friend, you know, stuck them in and smoothed the style, and apparently everybody was happy with that.
Wow, that's a really interesting kind of co-authorship. This is the sex go-to person over here. I love it. Well, fortunately, you don't have that problem, so you're able to write both. But anyway, I really enjoyed that. Then next one is?
Plague of Zombies. This is another Lord John story. See, one of the interesting things about Lord John is that his profession means that I can move him almost anywhere and engage him instantly in military situations which have underlying tension and conflict. So I was again looking at my timetable of histories as to what interesting things might have happened in 1761. Well, basically nothing interesting happened in 1761. So I said, well, you know, we know that in 1766 he's going to be the governor of Jamaica, so maybe he's had prior experience there that suits him for this office. So I said, okay, he's going to Jamaica. So what happened there that he could be looking into? Well, the obvious thing was a slave rebellion, so I looked up to see if there were slave revolts in Jamaica during that time, and fortunately enough, there were. So a lot of the background there of the Maroons, which were the escaped slaves who lived in the highlands of Jamaica, is actually taken from a historical reference called Black Rebellion, 5 slave revolts in Jamaica during the 18th century. So I used several of the personages from that, as well as some of the descriptions of the Maroons' habits of life and dress and so forth.
Lord John's really become a full-fledged Outlander. I mean, he's not just wandering around having interesting episodes and then disappearing off into the woods to do whatever, but he's got a life of his own. What does he do in the 4th story?
Let's see. Well, actually, the 4th story is not his. The 4th story is called The Space Between. And this one takes place in 1778 and is a total departure from everything else.
Oh, that's right.
This is a story that stars, Joan McKimmey, who is Marcelly's younger sister, Michael Murray, who is young Ian's elder brother, he's the middle one of the brothers, the Comte Saint-Germain, who is, of course, not dead, surely you didn't think he was, and Mother Hildegard and her dog Bouton. And so this takes place actually in Paris. You may remember toward the end of Echo in the Bone, Michael's father, the elder Ian, dies in Scotland, and he has come home briefly, to be there with his family and so forth. He then goes back to France, where he's been in partnership with his cousin Jared, running the wine business there. And he's given the task of escorting Joan, who is Jamie's stepdaughter, to Paris because she's going to join a convent and become a nun, or at least so she thinks. Of course, things happen on the way. And if I could pause here, I will read you a very brief excerpt from this. This is on the ferry across the English Channel to France. And there's just been a conversation, and at the conclusion of which Joan leaves the cabin and goes up on deck, leaving Michael in conversation with an elderly French couple that he's been talking to. Joan has just discovered that in spite of studying French assiduously in the Highlands of Scotland, reading French novels, she can't actually speak French. Somewhat shaken by this, she's gone upstairs. These people are, of course, actually speaking French here, but what a waste of a wonderful horse, Monsieur Ricken remarked in French, watching Joan's ascent from the far side of the cabin. And mon Dieu, those legs. Imagine those wrapped around your back, eh? Would you ever keep the striped stockings on? I would. It hadn't occurred to Michael to imagine that, but he was now having a hard time dismissing the image. He coughed into his handkerchief to hide the reddening of his face. Madame Recken gave her husband a sharp elbow in the ribs. He grunted, but seemed undisturbed by what was evidently a normal form of marital communication. Beast, she said, with no apparent heat, speaking so of a bride of Christ. You'll be lucky if God himself doesn't strike you dead with a lightning bolt. Well, she isn't his bride yet, Monsieur protested. And who created that ass in the first place? Surely God would be flattered to hear a little sincere appreciation of his handiwork. From one who is, after all, a connoisseur in such matters. He leered affectionately at Madame, who snorted. A faint snigger from the young man across the cabin indicated that Monsieur was not alone in his appreciation, and Madame turned a reproving glare on the young man. Michael wiped his nose carefully, trying not to catch Monsieur's eye. His insides were quivering, and not entirely either from amusement or the shock of inadvertent lust. He felt very queer. Monsieur sighed as Joan's striped stockings disappeared through the hatchway. Christ will not warm her bed, he said, shaking his head. Christ will not fart in her bed either, said Madame, taking out her knitting. Pardonnez-moi, Michael said in a strangled voice, and clapping his handkerchief to his mouth, made hastily for the ladder as though seasickness might be catching. I should mention that Michael's recently widowed. It wasn't mal de mer that was surging up from his belly, though. He caught sight of Joan, dim in the evening light at the rail, and turned quickly aside, going to the other side, where he gripped the rail as though it were a life raft, and let the overwhelming waves of grief wash through him. It was the only way he'd been able to manage these last few weeks. Hold on as long as he could, keeping a cheerful face, until some small, unexpected thing, some bit of emotional debris, struck him through the heart like a hunter's arrow, and then hurry to find a place to hide, curling up on himself in mindless pain until he could get a grip of himself. This time it was Madame's remark that had come out of the blue, and he grimaced painfully, laughing in spite of the tears that poured down his face, remembering Lily. She'd eaten eels and garlic sauce for dinner. Those always made her fart with a silent deadliness, like poison swamp gas. As the ghastly miasma had risen up round him, he'd sat bolt upright in bed, only to find her staring at him, a look of indignant horror on her face. "How dare you?" she'd said, in a voice of majesty. "Really, Michel, you know it wasn't me." Her mouth had dropped open, outrage added to horror and distaste. "Oh," she gasped, gathering her small pug dog to her bosom. "You not only fart like a rotting whale, you attempt to blame it on my poor puppy." Cochon! Whereupon she had begun to shake the bed sheets delicately, using her free hand to waft the noxious odors in his direction. Addressing censorious remarks to Pompoin, who gave Michael a sanctimonious look before turning to lick his mistress's face with great enthusiasm. "Oh, Jesus," he whispered, and sinking down, pressed his face against the rail. "Oh, God, lass, I love you." He shook silently, head buried in his arms, aware of sailors passing now and then behind him, but none of them took notice of him in the dark. At last the agony eased a little, and he drew breath. All right, then. He'd be all right now, for a time. And he thanked God belatedly that he had Joan, or Sister Gregory if she liked, to look after for a bit. He didn't know how he'd managed to walk through the streets of Paris to his house, alone. Go in, greet the servants, Would Jared be there? Face the sorrow of the household, accept their sympathy for his father's death, order a meal, sit down, and all the time wanting just to throw himself on the floor of their empty bedroom and howl like a lost soul. He'd have to face it sooner or later, but not just yet. And right now he'd take the grace of any respite that offered. He blew his nose with resolution, tucked away his mangled handkerchief, and went downstairs to fetch the basket his mother had sent. He couldn't swallow a thing himself, but feeding Sister Joan would maybe keep his mind off things for that 1 minute more. That's how you do it, his brother Ian had told him as they leant together on the rail of their mother's sheep pen, the winter's wind cold on their faces, waiting for their dad to find his way through dying. You find a way to live for just 1 more minute, and then another, and another. Ian had lost a wife too, and knew. He'd wiped his face. He could weep before Ian, well he couldn't with his elder brother or the girls, certainly not in front of his mother, and asked, "And it gets better after a time, is that what you're telling me?" His brother looked at him straight on, the quiet in his eyes showing through the outlandish mohawk tattoos. "No," he said softly, "but after a time, you find you're in a different place than you were, a different person than you were, and then you look about and see what's there with you. You'll maybe find a use for yourself. That helps." "Aye, fine," he said under his breath and squared his shoulders. "We'll see then."
So, the Comte Saint-Germain, was he a real person as well as a famous fictional character?
The Comte Saint-Germain was indeed a real historical person, and a very mysterious one. He is reported to have popped up in several different centuries and in several different places. And no one knows whether it was meant to be the same man, whether it was multiple people assuming the same identity. He was known to have an interest in the occult and had a reputation as a sorcerer. Occasionally he held some office in state government, sometimes he didn't. And he occurred in places from Hungary all the way across Europe, though mostly in France. So yes, he was a real person, and obviously he had good reason not to be dead.
Well, it's fascinating to read about. So you can see that if you read Trail of Fire, you will get a taste of any number of different things, which will keep you on edge waiting for next year's book, right? Yay. And possibly more short stories of 70 or 80,000 words or 14. However that goes.
Well, there is one more novella, which is already written. I'm not going to write any more novellas till I finish Moby. If you're wondering why it's called Moby. My Own Heart's Blood, M-O-H-B, Moby. It's just shorter than written in My Own Heart's Blood.
Can you see the shape of Moby yet? Is it looking like a serpent or an elephant or a mobile or?
It looks like piano keys.
Piano keys, okay. Diana always gets this sort of image, of how the book structure is going to be, but I've never been able to quite coordinate the image for the book. So how's it work for you?
Well, I could point it out, for instance. In Outlander, that book is composed of 3 overlapping triangles. There are 3 separate climaxes in that book. The first one where Jamie takes Claire back to the Stones after the witch trial. He discovers who she is, urges her to go back to Frank, and she has her moment of decision. Well, then the story comes down again as they go to Lallybroch. The tension relaxes. Then there is another climax when he's captured and taken to Wentworth prison, and the climax there is when she rescues him from Wentworth amidst all kinds of trauma. Well, it comes down again then when they escape to France and take refuge at the Abbey, and the final climax is when she saves his soul at the Abbey, and then it comes down again to their hot tub experience, as one reader put it.
Euphemism for sex scene, but that's all right. So that was the shape of that one, and then?
Oh, well, let's see. Dragonfly and Amber is shaped like a dumbbell. It's got that framing story with Roger and Guylas Duncan and Brianna and Claire, and that is the little fasteners that hold the dumbbells on. So you get through that first framing bit, which has its own small arc, and then you get the first arc of all of the politics and intrigue in Paris, which has another arc coming down to their leaving Paris and going back to Lallybroch. Then you have a fairly serene, level spot in the middle, which is the bar at Lallybroch, and then suddenly it blows up again into the arc that leads to Culloden. And Culloden, of course, comes down and ends with Claire's return. And then you have another fastener where the other end of that framing story comes on, and Guylas Duncan goes back, and Roger reveals to Claire that Jamie meant to die at Culloden, but he didn't.
Now, the reason that she needs the shape is actually a very interesting one, because Diana has her own particular way of writing stories.
Yeah, no, I write where I can see things happening in bits and pieces. I need what I call a kernel to start writing on any given occasion. It's a vivid image, a line of dialogue, an emotional ambiance, anything I can sense concretely. And so when I found one of those, I write it down in a line or two, and then I sit there and stare at it. I take words out, and I put them in, and I shuffle pauses around. And I'm trying to make those line or two be as clear and as euphonious and as elegant as I can. Meanwhile, the back of my mind is kicking up questions. What time of day is it? How is the light falling? Are there other people in the room with me? Are my feet cold? No, they're not. There must be a fire. Yes, it's over there. Oh, there's a dog by the fire. I haven't seen him before. Whatever he is, that sort of thing. Anyway, that's where the rest of it begins to come from, is that undercurrent of constant questions. Meanwhile, the top of my mind is engaged with the straight craft of making this sound good. And so the scene starts to evolve back and forth on either side of that kernel. And I will have gone through the scene, literally hundreds of times before I'm through with it, just fiddling and tweaking and moving things. And when I'm done with it, it's as good as I can make it. I don't actually do drafts and revisions in the way that most people understand it. I just revise all the time when I'm writing. But when I'm done with a scene, I'm done with it. And then I'll go and look for another kernel. Well, gradually these handfuls of little disconnected scenes start to stick together, and they will build what I call a chunk, which might be 40 to 60,000 words of contiguous scenes, but they're not connected to each other yet. Well, meanwhile, I do research all the time that I'm writing, and the research generates a timeline, which is kind of the backbone of the story. I have this event that I want to deal with, and that event, and this one here, and I can line those chunks up against those events. And at that point, they become orderly, and with luck, I can see what the shape is at that point. And then it becomes much easier for me to fill in what's missing.
But if you don't have the shape, you don't really know how to stick them all together.
Yeah. Well, I can put them against my timeline, but even so, they aren't fastened down tightly until I've seen the shape. They can still move.
Yeah, I mean, I think, is that one reason the books are so big?
Well, probably is. The other is just that they're really complex stories.
Right.
And they are historical novels, so you have a great deal of detail, explaining the historical context and the lives these people lived. Somewhat apropos of that, just lately I've taken to posting on my Facebook page what I call revolutionary lines. I've been for the last year posting what I call the daily lines, and these are just little snippets of whatever I'm working on. Moby for the most part, sometimes one of these novellas or the next book or novella that's coming up. Things like that, which people like a lot. But I started during this month leading up to the election posting the revolutionary lines. I don't talk religion or politics in public ever, but I said I think given the lamentable state of historical education in America, I thought it might be instructive to post lines from, the founding fathers and other people living during revolutionary times, see what they actually said. So I've been taking little quotes from Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, George Washington, Abigail Adams, and Daniel Morgan and so forth. They're really not going to like the Daniel Morgan one for tomorrow. Because no matter what you post, people are going to accuse you of choosing it to reflect your particular political philosophy, which in fact I'm not doing. But someone took exception to my posting a line in which Thomas Jefferson described what he thought of as the ideal government. And they said, well, you sound like you're shilling for the Tea Party, which I thought was pretty funny under the circumstances.
You just gave me a great idea. Maybe I'm going to start an e-news. I'm going to post chunks of Federalist Paper number 10, the one we all need to read. That's the one that says, on the day that we all succumb to a tyranny of minorities, our federal system will break apart. And our country will too. And personally, I think we're there. Our founding fathers saw that, in fact, the federal system depended upon consensus and a majority. And where we are at the moment is not working. So, and that's not a pro either party statement, it's just a statement. And I think Europe is going through a very similar situation. And a lot of parallels there too, actually, to the Constitution. When we moved from the Articles of Confederation, there were two things that our country couldn't do in its initial form. It couldn't levy taxes federally, and it couldn't raise an army. And that's the reason we went to the Constitution, which gave the federal government that power, and then we fought a civil war to reinforce that. It really wasn't about slavery. It really was about whether the federal government would survive. So now we're in another testing period, I think. It's, very, very interesting. Anyway, I like that idea. I think I'll just dredge out Federalist Paper number 10 and, put it up there, see how it all goes. I have a final question, which is, hilariously, looking back on it, you actually convinced me that this was just going to be a trilogy. Now, we've moved way past that as we're heading on to book 8, plus the slins and the bulges. But where did you see, are you writing towards like any end?
Yeah, I can see the end. There will be 9 books all told in the main series, the big enormous one. So Written in My Own Heart's Blood is the 8th. There will be one after that. But, I'm pretty sure that's the end. I can see where that one's going, more or less. Yeah, now there will also be a prequel book about Jamie Fraser's parents, which I've been picking away at a little bit at a time. And, in the fullness of time, we're also going to deal with Master Raymond, but he will be kind of a separate series.
This is why it's really good news she's writing slins and bulges, because at some point, I remember you said to me years ago that this was Claire and Jamie's story.
Yes.
And when they, in the fullness of time, have aged out, that's it. It's not going to just move on to Brianna or whatever. So you've actually evolved a rather interesting way of ducking that, which is now you can write about everything else. You can go forward, backwards, sideways, bring in more people, which I think is great, because what you've really done is constructed sort of like a science fiction author has to populate a whole world and create it and do geography and all the rest of it. And that's
the universe.
Yeah, you've created a whole Outlander universe that you can wander around in as long as you want.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Do you all have questions? Anybody like to ask a question?
How did it change from an octopus to piano keys?
Oh, how did it change from an octopus to piano keys? I've been telling people for months, including my editors, that I want an octopus on the cover of Written in My Own Heart's Blood. Well, that's just the cover image. The shape is what I need for my work. Usually the shape doesn't show up anywhere. It did on an Echo in the Bone, which had a caltrop on the front. And in fact, my editor is saying, "Oh no, you don't. I think we need something, more recognizable as than an octopus." And I said, "Everybody recognizes an octopus." And I said, "Besides, we had a caltrop on the last one, and no one knew what that was." People kept saying, "What is this? A Celtic chicken foot?"
What is it? You might want to define it for those who don't know.
Oh, caltrop. Yeah, it's a very old military weapon, as a matter of fact. It looks like a child's jack with 4 spines, and they are constructed in a tetrahedron so that if you throw a handful of them on the ground, they'll all land with the spikes sticking up. I mean, they have 4 spikes, so one of them is bound to be sticking up no matter how you throw them. They were used to defeat elephants back in the day of Hannibal and so forth. They used really big ones for that. And nowadays the Highway Patrol still uses them to stop speeding cars. They now have them embedded in little plastic mats so they can throw the mat out on the road and then roll it up again after the perp is apprehended, rather than having to pick them all up off the road one at a time.
It's sort of like playing jacks, but they've worked their way around that. I like that. That's great. Any other questions?
Oh, when will it be made into a movie? Well, with any luck, it won't. We have a deal with Sony Pictures to develop it as a cable TV series. So, something actually has happened in that direction lately, but I'm not allowed to tell you about it until they do their own press release, which I'm told they should be doing within the next week or 2. So, you will get somewhat more news here.
Yeah. Will you post that?
Yes, I'll post that on, everywhere. So everybody wants to know that.
Have you mentioned the Outlandish Companion?
Oh, I don't think I did. I will recognize you momentarily. Yeah, the Outlandish Companion is, well, most of you will know what that is. It's a book of trivia and background and so forth. It has detailed synopses of the first 4 novels, a list of the cast of characters. If you can't remember who someone was, you can look them up and see which book they occurred in and basically what they did there. And it's got other articles on Gaelic pronunciation and the difference between Scots and Gaelic and how I research and where the various characters came from and little bits and pieces. Well, there will be a second volume of The Outlandish Companion as well, which will be published. I've been working on it for the last several years, just throwing things into a file and tidying it up once in a while. But it'll be published after Written in My Own Heart's Blood comes out, because it covers that one as well as the Lord John books and the preceding 3 big novels.
Okay, so before book 9.
Before book 9, we will probably have a small coda or Outlandish Companion 3 that covers book 9, the prequel, and whatever other Lord John or other slins have been written in the meantime.
Okay.
Um, I read the first one a long time ago, the first two actually,
Yeah.
just kind of drifted away from it.
Sure.
So I picked one up at the big sale at Books, and I was wondering, how did it start? I mean, was it just one of those things, a whimsy, that, going through time that way?
Oh, no, that was another series of accidents. I wrote Outlander for practice to learn whether I could write a novel and how to. I'd always wanted to be a novelist, and when I turned 35, I said, well, Mozart was dead at 36, maybe we better get a move on here. And, so I said, fine, I'm going to start writing a novel. I just need to see what it takes in terms of daily commitment and mental discipline to write a novel. So, all right, I'm not going to tell anyone what I'm doing, I'm not going to show it to anyone, it's not for publication. I just need to know how to write a novel. So I said, okay, what kind of novel shall I write? Because I read everything and lots of it. I said, well, I read maybe more mysteries than anything else, and maybe I should write a mystery. I said, no, mysteries have plots. I don't know if I can do that. And, so I said, what's the easiest book I could write for practice? And after some thought, I said, well, maybe a historical novel. Because I was a university professor at the time. I had the university library to hand, and I knew what to do with it. I said, it seems easier to look things up than to make them up. And if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record, which works really well, as a matter of fact. So I said, fine, historical novel. Where shall I set this? Because I don't have any background in history. Just the 6 hours of Western civilization they make you take as an undergraduate. So I'd have to look everything up anyway, and each time would do as well as another. So I was casting around looking for a good time and place, and I happened to see a really old Doctor Who rerun on public television. I see most of you know what Doctor Who is. For those who don't, it's a really old British show in which the Doctor, who is a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey, travels through space and time in his TARDIS, and along the way he picks up companions from different periods of Earth's history. Well, this really old show, which has to have been filmed 50 years ago, he had picked up a young Scotsman from 1745. And this was a young man, 17, 18, who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's kind of fetching. I found myself still thinking about this the next day in church. And I said, well, you want to write somewhere. Just start somewhere. Doesn't really matter where, just pick a point and get going. So I said, fine, Scotland, 18th century. So that's where I began, having no plot, no outline, no characters, and knowing nothing about Scotland or the 18th century. All I had was a man in a kilt, which is, of course, a very powerful and compelling image. A few years ago, I won a Corina International Prize for Fiction, which was very cool. Got to go to Germany to accept it, and while I was there, I was being interviewed day and night by everybody in the German press. Toward the end of this rather grueling schedule, I was talking to a man who ran one of the literary journals. He said, oh, I've read all of your work. Your imagery is so transcendental, your characters so three-dimensional. I'm thinking, yes, go on. Instead, he paused and said, there's just this one thing. I wonder, would you explain to me what is the appeal of a man in a kilt? Well, he was a German, and a man. And I was really tired, or I might not have said it, but I just looked at him for a minute. And I said, well, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against the wall with him in a minute.
How did he react to that?
Well, he just sort of nodded and wrote it down. His cameraman sort of... The cameraman later sent me a jar of honey. But I got home 3 weeks later from the school junket and found a pile of press clippings waiting for me, including that one. I recognized the man's name, but it had a Post-it note on it from the German publisher. It said, I don't know what you told this man, but I think he is in love with you. But like I say, very powerful and compelling image. But that's when I started with Man in a Kilt.
It's all very fortunate, I think, the way it worked out. And, it's fun because watching this evolve, I mean, we've been doing this together now for 22 years or something like that. It's really been interesting to watch it just kind of grow, from that original novel. We had an employee when Diana published Outlander whose mission it was to sell a copy to every person who walked into the place. And you could always, she did, and you could always tell the days she worked because there would be this, 20 copies, and whatever. And really, none of us at that point knew quite where it was going to go. The British title came in, it was called Cross Stitch, and you brought some in. And, then suddenly there was going to be a new book, and on it's gone. It's really been, even we don't know where it's going half the time. It's really been a lot of fun. Does anybody else have a question for Diana Science?
I don't know if you can
Oh, Perseverance Wainwright, yeah.
When he first meets Lord John, he's very English.
Mhm.
And then in The Echo and the Bone, he's very French. And that confuses me. And then, I'm curious, will we find out anymore if there's
You will.
some Beecham connection?
Well, let's see. Have you been listening to the audiobooks? Yeah, okay, that would explain why. He's actually not supposed to have a French accent, but he is presented as he told the landlady or he seemed French to the landlady because of the way he was dressed and his name, which he pronounced in French. And so she tells Lord John, "Oh, there's a Frenchman waiting in your room to see you." Of course, when Lord John goes up to see him, he finds so as he puts it in the new book. He runs into Percy again, and he's referring to him as ex-lover, ex-brother, French spy, and all-around shit.
That's such a good point, though, about your experiencing them as audiobooks, the different ways that people, come to stories really color how you react to them. I think the Outlander books are terrific candidates for what they're now calling enhanced ebooks. Meaning you can put lots of images and, music and, basically all kinds of stuff. So when you're reading it, you would get, what do they call it now? Rich media or some such?
Yeah, something like that.
There's, all these technical buzzwords. But basically that means that you could, take it as an ebook and then there would be maps and there would be all sorts of fun stuff. And I personally would enjoy that more if I had already read it as a book. Because then nothing's between you and the story, right? It's just you and the book and a mind meld, and everybody reads the book differently, so it's your own experience. And people watch things, when they watch things together, it's a different experience than it is if you're reading something privately. So I love that idea of being able to read them, but then someday maybe being able to go back and, do it this other way. Will, do you have any questions from anybody who's watching?
People, they just love your books. And that's like,
Oh, okay. Will's got this huge online audience he's monitoring, and some of the time people do ask questions, but we probably skipped around all over so that we could do that.
Yeah, I should add about the enhanced ebooks that I'm presently working on 2 little nonfiction ebooks. One of them is just mine, and it's called How to Write Sex Scenes. This is sort of not exactly a reaction. I'd been planning for a long time to write one of those books that people who've been writing for a long time always do write in an effort to explain what I know about the business. And part of this is definitely how do you write sex scenes, because frankly not many people do it all that well.
You just want to put that woman out of work.
Yes. Well, I started seeing in the wake of 50 Shades of Grey and so forth a lot of people in writers' websites saying, I bet I could do that. I could write badly written smut, make $1 million. And I sort of was thinking, well, why should it be badly written? Wouldn't it be better if you did a good job at it? So anyway, I am writing a book called How to Write Sex Scenes, which consists of about 15,000 words of text, which is plenty to explain how it's not that complicated. And, another 25,000 of examples. It will also include pictures. Just 2, but they're pictures. Besides that, though, we will have, I'm working toward this a year or so ago, this nice young professional chef wrote to me and she said, I just adore your books. I have this web blog that I post on frequently with, culinary things, and I wonder, would you mind if I wrote up official recipes for some of the dishes you described so deliciously in Outlander? I said, cool, great idea, do it. So she did, was posting these, got more and more people interested and excited, and so she started doing little videos of herself preparing them. And so we're working toward the idea of doing an enhanced ebook of her recipes, my bits of text from the books explaining, where the dish occurred in the story, and then little videos of her preparation. Well, I mention this because I just met her this weekend for the first time in person. She came to a book signing I did at the Writers' Conference where I was, and she brought me a little glass dish with a lid containing one of the recipes that she'd improvised. It's called Stephen Bonnet's Balls. Share the ingredients with us? Well, it was fairly simple. They were large pretzel balls, pretzel dough, baked with coarse salt on top, but they were filled with bittersweet chocolate. They were really good.
That's a wonderful idea. I love it. There's no end to the things that you could go on doing.
If I live long enough.
Well,
Well, I want to thank all of you, because the truth is that while Diana and I always have a good time doing this together, the most important people in the room are you guys, because without you, we wouldn't have any reason to be here. So thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you so
Yay.
much.
And I want to thank Diana for once again coming down and chatting with all of you and having such a good time.
It's my
Yay.
pleasure. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our web audience who's joined us, and we hope that even though you couldn't come, if you'd like to buy a book, you can order it over our website, so please feel
Sign
free
that
to
for
do
you.
that. Right, and Diana does, is it three Gaelic bits?
Yes, but we're now in the fall quarter, so I've got 4. I can say Merry Christmas in Gaelic too.
Ah, right, so you can request Merry Christmas or...
Or Lemis, which means, it really means with respect, but it's the equivalent of best wishes. Or Slancha, which you probably know, that means to your good health in Gaelic. Or Abagabra, which is Scotland forever.
So, anyway, on that note, would you like to head towards that little wooden table over there and autograph books?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you very much. If you're in the audience, would you take a minute to stand up, and let me ask you over here, you the first group, everybody else stay seated a minute. If you could stand up and fold your chairs up and move them against the wall to create a space, and then if you guys would go next, that way we won't all trip over ourselves in the chairs. So just hang on.